You're out of order." The words thundered across the chamber. Judge Andrew Napolitano's voice slicing through the air like a gavel. Cameras zoomed in, capturing his sharp glare, the impatience of his tone, and the confidence a man used to silencing opposition. For years, Napolitano had thrived on moments like this, commanding the room, cutting off challengers, and basking in the authority his title carried. But this time, something felt different. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, her expression calm, her eyes unwavering. The contrast was striking. Napolitano's bluster against Crockett's composure. The room, filled with murmurs and shifting gazes, seemed to hold its breath. Viewers at home leaned forward, sensing that this wasn't going to be another ordinary exchange of words. This was about to become something much bigger. Napolitano leaned in, his tone dripping with condescension. "You don't have the experience. You don't have the authority. And frankly, you don't have the right to lecture me on the Constitution." Gasps rippled through the room. His words weren't just an attack. They were a dismissal, an attempt to belittle, to silence. For a split second, silence followed, the kind of silence that weighs heavy before a storm breaks. And then Crockett spoke. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Steady, deliberate. It cut through the air sharper than any shout could. "Judge Napolitano," she began, "what you just said isn't about the Constitution. It's about power. And here's the truth. Your time of silencing voices like mine is over." The crowd stirred. Eyebrows shot up, whispers spread, and even the cameras seemed to lean closer. This wasn't the reaction Napolitano had expected. He blinked, his composure faltering ever so slightly, as Crockett's words landed with the weight of undeniable authority. The clash wasn't just beginning. It was erupting. A battle between arrogance and dignity, between outdated dominance and a new, fearless voice. But what Jasmine Crockett was about to say next would leave the entire room stunned and send shockwaves across the nation. The tension in that chamber wasn't just about two people clashing. It was about something far deeper. Judge Andrew Napolitano represented a long-standing tradition of authority figures who leaned on titles, stature, and aura of unquestioned power. For decades, figures like him had dictated the terms of political discourse, often silencing anyone who dared to challenge them. To many watching, this felt like history repeating itself. Another attempt to dismiss a woman of color, another effort to strip legitimacy from a rising leader. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't simply standing up for herself. In that moment, she was embodying something larger, the voices of millions who had been interrupted, sidelined, or told they didn't belong. Every viewer who had ever been cut off mid-sentence by someone louder, wealthier, or more powerful felt the sting of Napolitano's words. And with every breath Crockett took before her reply, anticipation mounted. Social media was already lighting up. Clips of Napolitano's attempted silencing were being replayed with outrage. Commentators tweeted live reactions. This isn't just condescension. It's erasure in real time. Hashtags like hashtag Stand With Crockett and hashtag Silence Broken started trending before the exchange had even reached its climax. And beneath the surface of the drama, a deeper battle was unfolding. This wasn't just a personal confrontation. It was about defining what authority means in America today. Does it come from titles and legacy? Or does it come from truth, preparation, and the courage to stand firm in the face of intimidation? That was the real reason the stakes felt so high. Viewers knew they weren't just watching a debate. They were witnessing a clash of eras. Napolitano symbolized the old guard, wielding authority like a weapon. Crockett symbolized a new wave, rooted in integrity, intellect, and unshakable dignity. And as the cameras rolled, every second felt electric, because what Crockett was about to unleash would not just answer Napolitano. It would rewrite the rules of who gets to speak, who gets to lead, and who truly hold the power in America. But nobody, not even her supporters, expected just how devastating her next words would be. For years, Judge Andrew Napolitano had built his reputation on commanding respect through authority. As a former judge and high-profile television commentator, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed his word was final. In studios and courtrooms alike, his sharp voice and sweeping gestures had silenced countless challengers. To his supporters, He was a man of principle, a defender of constitutional order. But to critics, his persona often blurred into arrogance, a reliance on titles and tradition to mask a deeper unwillingness to be challenged. Napolitano's strength was never humility. It was dominance. He thrived on legal jargon and courtroom theatrics, overwhelming opponents not with reasoned empathy, but with sheer force of delivery. Time and again, he positioned himself as the gatekeeper of truth, often dismissing younger or less powerful voices with smirk or a scolding tone. This pattern won him airtime, headlines, and admiration from those who valued spectacle over substance. Yet, it also revealed cracks, a man more concerned with maintaining control than engaging in genuine dialogue. When Napolitano stepped into this latest confrontation, he likely expected another easy victory. He saw Jasmine Crockett not as an equal, but as an opponent he could sweat aside with a few stern words. After all, it had worked before. Audiences had seen him cut off lawmakers, derail commentators, and leave critics fumbling for words. Why should this be any different? But beneath his booming voice was a blind spot, an assumption that authority alone was enough to command obedience. He underestimated Crockett's preparation, her conviction, and the weight of the values she carried into that room. To him, this was just another performance, another chance to reinforce his dominance. What he didn't realize was that the very tactics that had once elevated him would soon betray him. In attempting to silence her, Napolitano was about to expose his own weakness, the inability to reckon with a voice he couldn't intimidate. And as the tension mounted, that weakness was about to be revealed in front of the entire nation. Long before Jasmine Crockett found herself staring down Judge Napolitano on live television, her story had already become a testament to resilience. Born into a world where the odds were rarely stacked in favor of women of color who dared to raise their voices, she learned early that silence was not survival. It was surrender. Her childhood was defined not by privilege, but by persistence. Crockett saw firsthand how systems designed to serve justice often failed the very people who needed it most, and that experience lit a fire in her that would never burn out. Her path to politics wasn't paved with shortcuts or inherited influence. It was earned, case by case, step by step, sleepless night after sleepless night. As an attorney, she represented those society too often ignored, the marginalized, the underpaid, the wrongfully accused. Every victory in the courtroom was not just about her clients, but about proving that dignity could still find its place in a system rigged against it. The law, in her hands, became less about statutes and more about stories. The stories of ordinary people crushed under extraordinary weight. This grounding gave Crockett an edge that few career politicians possessed. She wasn't groomed for the spotlight. She was forged in the struggles of her community. Her identity wasn't an accessory. It was armor. She wore her roots with pride, not as a shield against criticism, but as a banner of representation. In spaces where she was often underestimated, she refused to let others dictate her worth. By the time she entered public office, Crockett carried with her the scars and lessons of every battle she had fought outside the halls of power. She knew what it meant to be dismissed, to be told, "Wait your turn," to be spoken over by voices who thought experience meant entitlement. And yet, each attempt to silence her only strengthened her resolve. This background made her uniquely prepared for moments like the one with Judge Napolitano, where others might have faltered under the weight of his booming presence. Crockett had already faced louder storms. Where others might have leaned into compromise, she had built a career on confrontation, not for spectacle, but for principle. Her calm in the face of Napolitano's arrogance was no accident. It was a culmination of a lifetime spent learning how to fight battles others thought were unwinnable. She didn't enter that confrontation hoping for validation from her opponent. She entered knowing that her voice represented millions who rarely got a seat at the table. And it was this history, this lived experience, that turned what should have been a one-sided clash into an electrifying reversal. Napolitano thought he was facing a politician. What he was really facing was a survivor, a fighter, and a voice that had been sharpened by the very injustices he was blind to. The stage was set. The clash was inevitable. And what came next would not only stun Napolitano, it would shake the entire room to its core. The air was thick with anticipation as the debate reached its breaking point. Napolitano leaned forward, his voice heavy with authority. the kind of tone designed to dominate and control. "Congresswoman, let's be clear," he said, his words sharp as a gavel striking wood. "Your interpretation of the law doesn't align with the Constitution as it was written." It was a move everyone expected. The classic play from his arsenal. He invoked tradition, precedent, and the weight of his title to push her into silence. But Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on his, steady, unshaken, and full of fire. She let the silence hang, letting the audience feel the arrogance of his tone before delivering her response. "Judge," she began, her voice even but laced with conviction. "The Constitution wasn't written to be a weapon against the people. It was written to protect them. What you call interpretation, I call evolution, because justice that refuses to grow dies in the hands of those clinging to the past." The audience murmured. Napolitano's brow furrowed. He hadn't expected resistance packaged with clarity and conviction. His rebuttal came faster, louder, more desperate, his words tripping over themselves as he tried to reassert dominance. "Evolution is not in the text. That's politics, not law," he barked. Crockett leaned in, her composure never breaking. "No," she replied, her tone rising with a steady power. "That's humanity. And if you can't see the difference, then maybe it's not the Constitution you're defending. It's your control over it." The clash now felt less like a debate and more like a storm, each exchange crackling with electricity. The audience shifted forward in their seats, drawn to the spectacle of an old guard authority figure slowly unraveling under the weight of a truth he couldn't contain. Napolitano tried interruption after interruption, his voice rising, his gestures growing wilder. But Crockett countered each move with precision, never shouting, never losing control, always anchoring herself in dignity and principle. The escalation reached its peak when Crockett, with deliberate calm, paused mid-sentence, letting silence cut sharper than any word. The judge's face reddened with frustration. For the first time in years, his tactics were failing him, not because his opponent lacked knowledge, but because she carried something far stronger, lived truth. And the audience could feel it. The balance of power was shifting. Then came the moment that would echo beyond the walls of that debate. Napolitano leaned back, smirking as if he regained control, and delivered what he thought was a killing blow. "Congresswoman," he said with a patronizing grin, "your passion is admirable, but passion doesn't rewrite the law. That's why judges exist, to keep emotions from overrunning the Constitution." It was a kind of line he had used 100 times before to end arguments, to close doors, to silence voices. But this time, it landed differently. Crockett didn't hesitate. She leaned forward, her eyes piercing through the smirk, and dropped a line so sharp it felt like the ground shifted beneath the room. "Judge, the law isn't supposed to erase humanity. It's supposed to serve it. And when a judge forgets that, it's not justice being defended, it's power." Gasps rippled across the audience. Napolitano's smirk faltered. For the first time, his practiced confidence cracked. Crockett didn't stop there. She pressed on, her voice rising with an undeniable rhythm, like each word was hammering nails into a coffin of outdated authority. "You say passion has no place in the law. But without passion, this country would never have abolished slavery. Without passion, women would still be silenced at the ballot box. Without passion, civil rights would still be a dream deferred instead of a reality. The law evolves because people demand it, people with the courage to care." The crowd erupted, applause, shouts, a wave of energy that swallowed the room whole. Napolitano raised a hand, tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Crockett had shifted the ground under his feet, turning his argument from a position of control into a relic of the past. She delivered the final strike with deliberate calm, letting her words pierce the silence that followed. "And if defending dignity, equality, and justice makes me too passionate for your courtroom, then maybe it's your courtroom that needs changing." The audience was on its feet. Napolitano's face burned with the weight of defeat. He tried to lean on his title, his years, his authority, but none of it mattered now. The mic drop had landed, and as the applause thundered on, one truth became undeniable. The judge had been dismantled, not by volume, but by clarity, conviction, and courage. The debate may have ended in that room, but its shock waves tore through the country like wildfire. Within minutes, Clips of Crockett's mic drop moment flooded social media. Hashtags blazed across timelines. Hashtag Crockett destroys. Hashtag passion is justice. And even the trending tag, hashtag courtroom needs changing. Twitter lit up with voices from every corner of the political spectrum. Supporters hailed her as a warrior for truth, a modern defender of justice unafraid to stare down establishment arrogance. One viral post captured the moment she declared, "Without passion, justice dies," and racked up millions of views overnight. Meanwhile, Napolitano's allies scrambled. His defenders attempted to spin the confrontation as emotional grandstanding, but their words fell flat against the raw power of Crockett's conviction. The more they dismissed her, the more ordinary people rallied behind her. Commentators on primetime shows replayed the exchange, frame by frame, dissecting not just her words, but the unwavering calm in her delivery. On college campuses, students share clips in classrooms as examples of how debates should be won. Not with interruptions and smirks, but with substance and courage. Civic groups invited Crockett to speak. Grassroots organizations adopted her words as slogans for campaigns. It wasn't just a takedown, it was a cultural moment. Napolitano, once the unshakable voice of legal authority, suddenly looked smaller, less untouchable. Headlines framed him not as a judge with wisdom, but as the man who had underestimated a rising star. And yet, as powerful as this moment was, it wasn't the end, because Crockett knew that words, no matter how sharp, were only the beginning of a larger fight. What she did next would push the narrative beyond one debate, straight into the realm of history. When the dust settled, one truth stood tall. This wasn't just about a single debate, or even about Napolitano himself. It was about what America chooses: honor, fear or dignity, silence or courage, stagnation or growth. Jasmine Crockett's words cut deeper than a counterpoint. They reframed the argument itself. She reminded people that the Constitution is not a museum piece to be guarded by gatekeepers of the past. It is a living promise, a safeguard for generations still building their place in the American story. And that reminder landed at a time when millions were searching for reassurance that justice still had a heartbeat in this country. The lesson was simple yet profound. Laws are empty without humanity. Rights are fragile without those willing to defend them. And democracy, without voices brave enough to challenge power, collapses into little more than theater for the powerful. Crockett's victory wasn't measured in Napolitano's silence, but in the resonance of her words with everyday people who saw their own struggles reflected in her defiance. Immigrants who had fought for recognition, families who had battled prejudice, young activists who carried the torch of justice. They all heard something in her voice, a validation of their fight. And in that validation came inspiration. She had turned a debate into a mirror, showing Americans a choice before them: cling to fear or rise with courage. As the cameras dimmed and the echoes of applause faded, one thing was certain. Crockett had not just won a debate. She had delivered a moral challenge to a nation. But even more, she had ignited hope. And so, the headline wrote itself: Judge Napolitano gets shut down by Jasmine Crockett Live. But beyond the spectacle, it was something more. It was proof that dignity can still triumph over arrogance, and that courage has the power to cut through even the thickest walls of authority. What this moment revealed is timeless. Truth doesn't need a robe or a title to stand tall. It needs a voice brave enough to speak, even when others try to silence it. Jasmine Crockett became that voice, not just for herself, but for millions who believe that justice must grow alongside the people it serves. And now it's up to us, because these moments only echo if we carry them forward. If you believe in the kind of America where compassion beats cruelty, where progress defeats fear, and where truth always finds a microphone, then don't just watch the story. Be part of it. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to this channel. Join a community that refuses to be silent, that demands justice, and that celebrates every voice brave enough to challenge power. Because this story doesn't end here. It begins with you.